Chapter 1. The Wealth and the Paradox. Imagine a continent that holds the keys to the future. A continent with over 1 billion people, a youth-driven population boom, and a staggering 30% of the world's mineral reserves. This is Africa, a land of extraordinary wealth and untapped potential. Its soils contain 70% of the world's cobalt, essential for powering the batteries of electric vehicles. It holds 80% of the platinum that drives clean energy technologies, alongside vast deposits of lithium, copper, manganese, and rare earth elements. These are the invisible engines of the modern world, fueling devices, vehicles, and renewable energy systems across the globe. Yet despite this immense wealth, Africa accounts for just a tiny fraction, a mere 3% of global trade. This is the paradox of Africa, a continent so rich in resources and human capital, yet historically sidelined in the global economy. For decades, the economic story of Africa was written by outsiders. Western aid and development programs, often framed as generosity, frequently came with conditions that restricted true growth. Potential was managed, contained, and in some cases exploited, leaving the continent's wealth to fuel technological revolutions elsewhere, while millions at home remained marginalized. But that story is shifting. Today, the continent stands at a crossroads, turning away from the dependency of the past and embracing a bold new vision: strategic partnerships with the BRICS nations. This alliance, a coalition of emerging global powers, promises trade, investment, and infrastructure that could reshape Africa's economic destiny. Consider the numbers. Africa possesses the raw materials for the global tech revolution. Yet for years, these resources were exported as unprocessed goods, leaving billions in potential value unrealized. The cobalt mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the lithium extracted in Zimbabwe, or the platinum from South Africa, these could fuel domestic industries, but for decades they fed foreign economies. Meanwhile, Africa's population is growing faster than any other region. More than 60% of its people are under the age of 25. This demographic explosion could be its greatest asset, a workforce capable of powering industrialization, entrepreneurship, and technological innovation. Yet without infrastructure, investment, and policy autonomy, this potential remains largely untapped. For generations, foreign aid was the default solution. It provided life-saving interventions, from food security to health programs. PEPFAR and USAID funded initiatives that saved millions of lives, but they also created a cycle of dependency. Aid often came with strings attached: structural adjustment programs, austerity measures, and privatization schemes that limited Africa's ability to chart its own economic path. This dual reality, immense wealth and persistent underdevelopment, created a paradox that defined Africa's modern history. The continent was rich, yet reliant; powerful, yet sidelined; full of potential, yet constrained. But cracks in the old model are becoming impossible to ignore. Political shifts in the West, combined with fluctuating global aid budgets, have revealed the fragility of dependence. For the first time, African nations are seeing a viable alternative, one built not on handouts, but on strategic partnerships that emphasize infrastructure, trade, and industrialization. This is the story of a continent reclaiming its agency. Africa is stepping out of the shadows of dependency, leveraging its natural wealth, youthful population, and strategic alliances to reshape the rules of global engagement. It is a gamble: high stakes, transformative, and potentially historic. Chapter 2. The Old Model and Its Cracks. For nearly a century, Africa's economic relationship with the West revolved around one word: aid. After the wave of independence in the mid-20th century, Western nations, led by the United States and former colonial powers in Europe, created a complex web of financial assistance programs. These programs promised health, infrastructure, and stability. On the surface, they appeared benevolent, even transformative.
Programs like the U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, brought life-saving interventions curbing epidemics that had devastated entire communities. USAID funded agricultural initiatives, food security programs, and vaccination campaigns, impacting millions. By 2020 alone, the United States contributed around a quarter of all foreign aid to Africa. Yet beneath the veneer of generosity lay a structural flaw. The colonial economic model, raw materials exported, finished goods imported, persisted under the guise of development aid. Aid often came with strings attached. Governments were pressured into structural adjustment programs dictated by the IMF and World Bank. These programs demanded austerity, privatization of state enterprises, and cuts to health and education budgets. African leaders were limited in their ability to make independent economic choices, and long-term industrial development was stifled. Initially, the system seemed functional. Aid programs provided stability, infrastructure, and crucial social services. But over time, cracks appeared. Dependence on foreign funds made national budgets fragile, vulnerable to political and economic shifts in donor countries. Proposed U.S. budget cuts in 2025 threatened to reduce funding for programs like PEPFAR and the Global Fund, potentially pushing millions into extreme poverty and undermining public health systems. Experts projected that without consistent aid, HIV treatment gaps could leave hundreds of thousands vulnerable, while malaria and other preventable diseases could see a resurgence. The message was unmistakable. The aid-based model was unreliable. Africa's economic trajectory was dictated not by its own choices, but by the political whims and fiscal priorities of distant governments. Even where aid achieved immediate results, long-term consequences were often overlooked. Structural adjustment programs weakened public institutions, restricted industrial policy, and reinforced dependence on imported goods. Economies grew unevenly, leaving gaps in infrastructure, energy, and industrial capacity. Africa was free politically, but constrained economically. Independence had come, but sovereignty remained incomplete. By the early 2020s, African nations increasingly recognized the fragility of this model. Western aid, once viewed as a lifeline, was now seen as unpredictable and insufficient for building true economic resilience. The continent faced a stark choice: continue under the shadow of dependency, or explore new partnerships that could unlock Africa's full potential. The cracks in the old model were no longer subtle. Political shifts in the West, coupled with inconsistent aid flows, created an urgent impetus for change. African leaders began to look elsewhere, toward nations and alliances that emphasized mutual benefit, investment, and trade over conditional handouts. Africa was beginning to take control of its destiny. The era of passive dependence was ending. The foundation for a bold economic gamble was being laid, one that could reshape the continent's future for generations to come.
Chapter 3: The BRICS Turning Point. As the old aid-based model faltered, a new economic force began to reshape Africa's future: BRICS. Originally composed of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the coalition evolved into a global economic powerhouse, representing over 40% of the world's economy in purchasing power parity terms and nearly half of the planet's population. For Africa, this was not just a political development. It was an opportunity to step out of dependency and into partnership. Trade surged. By the first 5 months of 2025, China-Africa trade alone had reached $134 billion, a 12% increase from the previous year. Total trade between Africa and China hit $295.6 billion in 2024, marking a new high. For 16 consecutive years, China had maintained its position as Africa's largest trading partner, surpassing all Western economies. Yet BRICS offered more than just trade. It brought investment in infrastructure, a vital need for a continent long constrained by roads that didn't connect regions, ports too small for modern shipping, and unreliable energy networks. Chinese construction firms now handle nearly a third of major infrastructure projects across Africa, a dramatic increase from less than 12% just a decade ago.
The impact of these projects is tangible. The Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway cut freight travel from 3 days to just 12 hours, revolutionizing logistics for landlocked Ethiopia. In Kenya, the standard gauge railway slashed transit time from Mombasa to Nairobi from over 12 hours to just 4, opening new opportunities for trade and business. Nigeria's Lekki deep-sea port, built by a Chinese firm, is now among West Africa's most modern ports, designed to accommodate the largest container ships in the world. Beyond roads, railways, and ports, energy infrastructure is transforming the continent. Massive hydroelectric power stations in Nigeria and Uganda promise to electrify millions of homes and businesses, powering industry and driving growth. Bridges such as Mozambique's Maputo-Katembe Suspension Bridge, the longest in Africa, are connecting regions that were once isolated for decades. The financial framework supporting these projects is equally transformative. The new development bank, headquartered in Shanghai, has become a powerful alternative to Western-dominated institutions like the IMF and World Bank. With tens of billions approved for strategic projects, the NDB is increasingly offering loans in local currencies, insulating African economies from the volatility of the US dollar and the political strings often attached to Western loans. The expansion of BRICS to include Egypt and Ethiopia in 2024 marked a new chapter for Africa's influence within the bloc. Other countries, including Nigeria, Uganda, and Malaysia, became partner nations, signaling a broader shift in global geopolitics. This is more than an economic alignment. It is a realignment of global power, with Africa asserting agency like never before. This new partnership isn't just about immediate gains, it's about building long-term capacity. African nations are now investing in industrial parks, manufacturing hubs, and technology zones, leveraging BRICS investments to create domestic industries that can process raw materials, generate jobs, and foster innovation. The BRICS turning point is historic because it shifts the paradigm. Africa is no longer merely a recipient of aid. It is a strategic partner in trade, infrastructure, and industry. The continent is taking control of its narrative, moving from dependency towards sovereignty.
Chapter 4: The Gamble, Risks and Rewards. Africa's pivot toward BRICS is bold, ambitious, and, as the title suggests, a high-stakes gamble. For decades, the continent relied on Western aid, a model that provided short-term stability but often undermined long-term sovereignty. BRICS offers an alternative: trade, investment, and infrastructure financing without the strict policy conditions that once dictated national decisions. Yet, every opportunity carries risk, and African leaders are fully aware of the stakes. The most common concern is debt trap diplomacy. Critics argue that China's massive loans could become unsustainable, leaving African nations vulnerable to political leverage if repayment fails. Headlines warn of repeating the mistakes of history when dependence on foreign powers dictated economic and political policy. Yet, African leaders see the situation differently. Unlike IMF loans, which came with strict austerity measures and structural adjustment conditions, BRICS loans fund tangible assets: railways, ports, industrial hubs, and power plants that generate economic returns. The debt is tied to development, not budget support, giving governments tools to grow their economies rather than simply service obligations. Trade imbalances are another challenge. In early 2025, Chinese exports to Africa surged by over 20%, while African exports to China grew by only 1.6%. African nations continue to export raw materials, oil, cobalt, copper, while importing high-value manufactured goods like electronics and machinery. This pattern echoes the colonial-era trade structure, and African leaders are actively negotiating solutions. China has responded with policy adjustments. Zero-tariff programs now cover the majority of imports from least developed countries, including 33 African nations. Chinese firms are increasingly investing in local industrial parks, producing textiles, electronics, and automobiles. Ethiopia's Eastern Industrial Zone alone hosts dozens of manufacturers, creating thousands of jobs, while similar hubs in Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa are fostering domestic production and technology transfer.
Navigating BRICS also requires diplomatic finesse. The bloc is not a monolith. It includes democracies and autocratic states, with China dominating economically. African nations must maximize opportunities while maintaining strategic autonomy, balancing relationships between East and West without being drawn into political leverage or dependency. Perhaps the most critical element of this gamble is Africa's bet on itself. Western aid, while life-saving, was unpredictable and often short-term. The continent now seeks self-reliance, using BRICS not as a crutch, but as a springboard for industrialization, trade expansion, and digital infrastructure development. The potential rewards are enormous. Strategic investments in infrastructure will reduce transportation costs, increase energy access, and improve connectivity. Industrial hubs will create jobs, train a new workforce, and enable Africa to capture more value from its natural resources. Digital networks, powered by companies like Huawei, are expanding internet access, facilitating e-commerce, fintech, and remote education. Yet risk is inherent. Mismanagement, corruption, or over-reliance on any single partner could undermine gains. African leaders are acutely aware that success depends on careful planning, transparent governance, and a commitment to local communities. In the end, the BRICS gamble is a choice: debt for development, autonomy over dependency, and partnership over passive aid. It is a test of African agency, vision, and resilience.
Chapter 5: Everyday Impact and Transformation. The story of Africa's pivot to BRICS isn't just about railways, ports, or industrial hubs. It is about the lives of ordinary people, farmers, small business owners, students, and families across the continent. Here, abstract trade deals and infrastructure projects translate into real, tangible change. Smallholder farmers now reach markets faster, reducing spoilage and increasing profits. Goods that once took days to transport can now arrive in hours, stabilizing livelihoods and providing access to better nutrition and education. Urban entrepreneurs benefit as well. Reliable electricity, water, and digital connectivity allow small businesses to grow. Solar projects, hydroelectric power, and modern water supply networks, often funded through BRICS partnerships, are transforming the way people live and work. Digital connectivity is a game changer. Huawei-supported networks now cover up to 70% of Africa's 4G connections, providing millions with internet access for the first time. E-commerce, fintech, online education, and telemedicine are rapidly expanding, creating opportunities for communities previously excluded from the digital economy. Industrial zones are creating thousands of jobs. Ethiopia's Eastern Industrial Zone, Nigeria's Lekki Free Trade Zone, and similar hubs in South Africa and Egypt host manufacturers in textiles, electronics, and automobiles. These zones transfer skills to local workers and help Africa capture more value from its resources. Education and healthcare are also benefiting. Schools connected to high-speed internet access benefit from global curricula. Entrepreneurs use fintech to start businesses with minimal capital. Rural clinics leverage telemedicine for diagnostics and treatment, bringing quality healthcare to remote areas. Challenges remain. Growth is uneven, and benefits can be captured by elites or foreign investors. Governments must ensure equitable development so infrastructure and industrialization uplift communities rather than concentrate wealth. Strategically, Africa is gaining influence on the global stage. Alternative payment systems like China's CIPS reduce reliance on the US dollar, giving African nations more bargaining power in international trade. The continent is negotiating as an equal rather than as an aid recipient. This transformation is more than just about economics. It's about agency, a continent reclaiming its narrative and shaping its future. Farmers, entrepreneurs, students, and workers are witnessing firsthand the tangible benefits of strategic international partnerships. Roads, factories, and digital networks are not just infrastructure, they are engines of opportunity. Africa is moving from the periphery to the center. The BRICS pivot is proving that international partnerships can be leveraged to create measurable, everyday impact, transforming lives, economies, and the continent itself.
Chapter 6: A Sovereign Future.
Africa's BRICS gamble is more than an economic pivot. It is a declaration of intent. African nations are asserting control over their destiny, moving from passive aid recipients to active players on the global stage. Infrastructure investments are connecting communities, reducing travel times, and linking regions to regional and global markets. Farmers, entrepreneurs, and local businesses benefit from roads, railways, and ports that increase efficiency and expand opportunities. Industrialization is accelerating. Factories in Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt produce goods that were once imported. Thousands of jobs are being created, and local workers gain skills that support long-term economic growth. Africa is transitioning from exporting raw materials to manufacturing value-added products. Energy access is transforming daily life. Hydroelectric plants, solar farms, and modern power grids bring electricity to homes, schools, and businesses. Reliable energy enables entrepreneurship, education, and healthcare, powering both economies and communities. Digital connectivity is reshaping education, commerce, and healthcare. Remote schools access global curricula online. Entrepreneurs leverage fintech to launch businesses, and clinics use telemedicine and real-time diagnostics. This digital revolution creates opportunities and levels the playing field. Challenges remain. Growth is uneven, and wealth risks being captured by elites or external investors. Governments must ensure that industrial, infrastructure, and digital projects benefit all communities, fostering inclusive growth and preventing new dependencies. Africa's sovereignty is reshaping geopolitics. Alternative payment systems like CYIPS reduce reliance on the US dollar, giving African nations more leverage in international trade. The continent is no longer asking for a seat at the table, it is helping define the rules of the global economy. Africa is writing a new story, one of ambition, agency, and growth. The era of passive aid dependency is ending, replaced by industrialization, infrastructure development, and digital transformation. From high-speed railways in the east to solar power plants in the south and industrial hubs in the west, the continent is reclaiming economic and political power. The story is far from finished. Africa's gamble carries risks, but holds unprecedented potential. The pen is firmly in African hands, and how the continent navigates this path will not only shape its own destiny, but influence the global balance of power for generations.